So it looks like everyone in the room is getting settled. I'd like to welcome everybody back. Really appreciate the presenters so far. There's been a lot of great information shared, information that we can all implement into our practice. My name is Nathan Downing. I focus mostly on FDA matters, regulatory compliance, and today I want to really discuss how to approach FDA and how to think about your FDA communication strategy as it relates to AI. And I'm going to kick off with a story, and it kind of will frame the context and how I think about approaching FDA and using them as partnership. This morning, my wife and my dog were on a run in our hometown. My wife and dog like to run every morning, and this morning, as they were running by a house, a grill exploded. It's probably like 5:30 or 6 in the morning. My wife goes pretty early. And after the grill exploded, a fire started. It went to the deck, and then it started going towards the house, and a portion of the house, very small, caught on fire. And by that point, my wife had called 911, and the fire department showed up, and some other neighbors had helped get people out. And so the house was saved. And you say, how does this relate to FDA, right? You're all going to experience fires in your day-to-day experience, right? And so you're going to have to determine, is this a fire that I can put out? Did I fail a test? I don't need to run FDA and tell them I failed the test, right? I can tell it my engineers, hey, we failed. I can't, rationalize this. I can't use this. We need to retest. Or is it something bigger, right? Is it something that you're not certain what's going to happen, and so you don't want to submit yet, because if you go to FDA and FDA says no, this might take 6 months to mitigate, you might be out of time, right? So your 510K, for example, might be no good. Or another way to say it, you need to call the fire department, FDA, before the fire engulfs your full house and you lose your project, right? Because FDA can show up when your house is fully in flames, and they're just going to say, here's your charred house back. Please call us when you build your next home, right? Please call us when you're ready to resubmit. If you engage FDA early and often with a strategy, you're going to have fires, but you're going to have help putting out those fires. And so that's, if I can leave anything with you in my 20 minutes, think of FDA as a partner in the right context, right? They're not always partner, there's some adversarial nature, but if you can utilize FDA in that manner, you're going to be a lot more successful. So my agenda today is, as I've pretty much laid out to you, it's pretty simple. We're going to talk about medical products, more specifically medical devices as it relates to artificial intelligence. And we're going to talk a little bit about thoughts to have on regulations and classifications, thoughts to have when you're thinking about issues and communication strategies, communication considerations when going to FDA. And then I'm also going to include some post-market considerations that I think are really going to creep up in the AI, artificial intelligence and machine learning space when you think about the amount of changes that can occur. So FDA is well aware of artificial intelligence, right? That's no surprise. Mark was already alluding to this. I have a few numbers up here. Between August 1st, 2022 and July 30th, 2023, FDA added 155 AI or ML devices to its tracking list. This tracking list is not all encompassing. This is more just to show the amount, not to give you a final number. And in that year, between 2022 and 2023, FDA expects an approximate increase of 30% year-over-year increase on devices utilizing AI and ML. And so if you look in the history, you'll see a very consistent, at least double-digit growth year-over-year. So FDA has seen more and more AI ML devices. That means they're getting more sophisticated, but FDA will also acknowledge, right, the regulations haven't caught up, right? Congress hasn't created new regulations. There aren't increasingly new standards that the FDA is able to officially adopt. So they're applying old standards to a very new area, right? So that's where communication on your device is going to help FDA frame your product with their current construct. Then I also want to point this out. This won't be something that I'm going to hit on the rest of the talk, but FDA also understands the use of AI in the pharmaceutical manufacturing area. There's predictive results that can have supply and demand and other things. And so recently in September, FDA held a workshop. So if you're interested in that, you should look up and see if you can find that, as well as understand that there's an opportunity for commenting on a discussion paper that was published. And so if you're interested, comments are available to be included through the 27th of this month. So a good opportunity for those companies who are impacted by manufacturing with AI to have your voice heard. So as I've discussed today, my focus really is going to be on medical devices and how to approach FDA. And obviously, given the mechanism of action of medical devices and AI, that's where you expect to see the most back and forth. So when you're going to look into getting your medical device on the market, or even whether it is needed to be on market as far as an FDA standard, consider the following. First, is your medical product actually a medical device regulated by FDA? This is an interesting topic I have with a lot of companies, right? Because many feel very strongly that it's not a medical device at all. I can do what I want to do, right? And I can move forward. And so I'm just showing you this, but we're not going to worry about FDA, right? And so we'll talk about some of the issues that can come up there. And then, does your device utilize AI/ML? Are you actually utilizing AI/ML to pursue your outcomes from a medical device standpoint? Because that's very important on how you approach FDA. How is your architecture of your full devices environment set up so that FDA is not looking for something that's not there, or they weren't expecting to see AI as part of your regulated component, and now they're seeing the full architecture and it's kind of getting gray whether or not that was part of the regulated environment. And then consider, how is your device classified and what are your potential paths for clearance approval? If you're a 510K and you have a predicate, did your predicate use artificial intelligence? If they do, great. If not, right, how does that impact my review with FDA? How can I investigate that with FDA, and how can I set myself up for success? And then, when and how will you utilize the pre-submission process? To me, this is a really important tool to use properly. By the time I get to submission, I wanted to have utilized the pre-submission process to eliminate as many unknowns as I can, right? Something's always going to creep up, but if I can utilize it smartly, I can help the business on the back end understand both timelines and the testing required. And then, what will be your change control strategy? You may say, what is change control doing in a CLE? Well, if you mishandle change control, you're going to be offering a misbranded or adulterated device into the market. And so making sure that you've got a change control strategy that accounts for AI without having to send every single change to FDA, which is going to bog down companies, is important. So understanding your medical product. When is it truly not a medical device, right? So as I alluded to, a lot of people will say mine's not a medical device. And you'll see in the definition of a medical device, there's actually a carve out specifically for software that performs certain functions. And so you've got to make sure you meet these 4 elements of this software that's not a medical device if you want to truly move forward as not a medical device, right? You get to stay out of 820 documentation. You can avoid quality system aspects as they relate to a medical device. You get speed to market. There's a lot of benefit, but there's also, you're going to have a limit on claims, right? So a lot of times when I'm talking to companies and they'll say, well, my software is not a medical device, the 3rd and the 4th kind of areas of that test are what we're going to be most concerned about, right? Are you supporting or providing recommendations, or are you really just giving steps for the physician to do, right? They'll say, well, I'm just recommending, but there's no other information. What else would the physician do? So you really want to analyze, how are you sending information to the physician? And then the 4th, are you providing information for an independent assessment, right? Because there's a lot of secret sauce that goes into AI, that goes into software that companies aren't willing to share, right? And so are you removing that ability to independently assess the recommendations? And if so, you might not fit within this non-medical device designation. And then, are you a medical device, but you're in an area where FDA is going to exercise enforcement discretion? Both, I think it was September 28th of 2022, guidances in both areas came out. And so you may be a medical device, but you may fit into this enforcement discretion area, depending on what your AI does, how it interfaces with your software, which is really going to save you a lot of time as far as pre-market submissions. However, that doesn't mean you're not a medical device, right? So you're still going to need those quality system components. So it's going to save you speed to market, but there's a lot of work you should be doing already. And then, do you have a medical device that doesn't fit within the definite, or do you have a medical device as in it's not within that FDA guidance on how to describe your device as not a medical device, and are you not able to use that enforcement discretion? And if so, now you really got to start thinking of your next steps. So first off, now you're thinking, okay, I do have a medical device. Is my artificial intelligence machine learning part of that regulated environment? because that's really going to frame how you approach FDA with it. If it's not, right, I'm always going to, in submissions, I might allude to it. I'm going to have very clear architecture showing the non-regulated environment, but I also want FDA to know all the interactions so they don't get confused or think I'm hiding something, right, when I'm really just trying to focus on the regulated portion. And so FDA defines artificial intelligence as using algorithms, models to perform tasks, exhibit behaviors such as learning, and then the last two I think are really important when it comes to medical devices, or making decisions and making predictions. So that's a lot of artificial intelligence it's going to do. It's going to help us take data, create some output that says, hey, based on all of these 10,000 patients who have done this before, here's the decision you can make. Or it's going to make predictions. Hey, 58,000 patients were simulated in this model. If you do X implant, we predict an outcome within, you know, this area. And so those are very specific outcomes meant to deliver patient treatment mitigations. And so FDA needs to know that, okay, what's your data look like? How are you going to use those data? How are you gathering those data? How are they controlled, right? All the confines of a clinical study to make sure your data are proper are going to be here. And so if that's the case, if your medical product has AI or ML, make sure you're discussing that with FDA so that they understand the sauce behind your algorithm. And then have a definition of machine learning. I'll skip that, but just understand what FDA is looking for. And if you have AI, ML in your product, really confirm whether it's part of the regulated portion. Now this goes to my last slide a little bit, but don't just assume there's a way to say, well, my AI is doing something out here, and then I pull in the output into my medical device, and now I'm going to move forward and give advice, right? That AI, that algorithm is leading to that decision. So if you create a testing, a VeriVal strategy based on that, and you get in front of FDA, they're going to say, hold up, I need to validate that these numbers are coming out correctly because these are impacting how the patient's treated. Now, is that an end game? No, but if you had known that 6 months earlier, a year earlier, you're going to already have a strategy to account for that, and you're going to be under review by FDA, and you're not going to have that surprise of, oh shoot, I've got a bunch of regression testing, I've got all this testing I've got to do that I don't have time for. And then just that last bullet there, really think about, you know, a lot of these systems are going to have non-medical device components. They might be commercial off-the-shelf components. And how do they interact with your AI? How do they interact with your machine learning algorithms? And what are the inputs that they create? Are they truly just pass-throughs? Or the cloud and you're just a way to store data and send it over? Great, make sure that's in your architecture. So when you go to FDA, FDA doesn't even have a question. They know exactly what you're doing and they know why you're doing it. So, you know, I've kind of talked, all right, we're in a medical device realm right now. So now think about what's my classification and how is that going to impact me moving forward to try to get my device that utilizes AI or machine learning approved. So think about, really this is a very general level, but the FDA classifications, right? Are you a class 1, a class 2 device that's exempt from the pre-market notification process? You still have a lot of controls in place. You still have to have a good quality system, good manufacturing, but you're not likely going to think about the next steps I talk about, the pre-submission process, because if you're really confident in your assessment, you might not need a request for designation, or you might not need some kind of 513G documentation because you're ready to go in that exempt pathway, and so you're gonna, probably not have a lot of engagement with FDA. But are you a class 2 device that requires pre-market notification to get your AI product on the market? Well, as I alluded to earlier, well, what does that mean, right? So now I've got to look at a predicate device, and it's going to have a certain indication, and maybe it's from 2015. And more likely, AI isn't a part of this device yet. So now I've got to say, well, is this indication even accurate for my device, right? I'm trying to use a 2015 that's not using machine learning, that's not using data and inputting into an algorithm to give me some type of prediction. So do I even have an indication? And then, well, the indication's close enough, and they have a testing strategy, but now my predicate, is it substantially equivalent to you? Is my technology so different that I'm about to submit on a predicate that FDA is not going to find convincing at all? And so maybe it's that you have a product that doesn't really have a predicate. So can you take advantage of the de novo process? And now what type of evidence is FDA going to ask for in that de novo, right? So your investors planned for a 510K, a classic 510K, a traditional 510K, and now you're starting to go towards the de novo path because the predicate you thought you had didn't fit. And so now Not even did the predicate not fit, now you might need clinical evidence that you were not going to use before because you had a predicate. So now you can see the costs pile up from a startup concept or even an established company, right? They gave you $50 million for a product. You have to do a $20 million clinical study that you didn't plan for. That eats into it really quickly, and that's how projects can fail. And then, are you a class 3? Are you a PMA device? Great. So maybe you're something like a DBS device, a deep brain stimulation device that's now incorporating AI. Well, you've seen approval pathway for a DBS device, but have you seen it when there's prediction, when there's machine learning that's going to adjust the stimulation based on an input internal to the device? Probably not, right? So how can I talk to FDA to make sure the testing I do, the clinical studies I develop and design are going to capture all of this so that when I'm ready to submit and get approval, I don't have a 2-year delay that I wasn't expecting. Time check. So what does this all kind of lead up to? Well, all of these are inputs into your FDA communication strategy, right? All of these documents, all of these decisions are going to say, okay, maybe I don't need FDA, I don't need pre-market clearance, good. Oh shoot, I'm going for a 510K and I think this is the right process, but I'm not sure. And if I'm wrong, I don't have enough time within the review. I can't do a submission request enough time to actually stop the 510K and still get clearance, right? So now you have to think, how can I mitigate that risk? And to me, a very smart pre-submission process is going to be your best aid in mitigating that risk. So for the first thing I want to talk about is an informational pre-submission. This is an option to start your dialogue very early, and if used properly, you're going to get actually good feedback from FDA. So FDA is in listening mode, right? They're not going to answer questions on a test. You're not going to say, hey, I ran this test for my verification, is that good? They don't have the background, right? But what you're going to do is you're going to have a story with your team. You can present that story. You're going to talk about the problem you're solving. What is this going to do to benefit patients, to benefit healthcare providers? And FDA is going to start listening and say, oh, this is the type of device it is. Oh, this is the group that they should be in front of, or these are the individuals that'll best be to speak to. So afterwards, you're going to be able to present your story, and FDA is probably going to follow up and at least say, hey, great presentation. We think you should talk further with a couple of individuals. So now maybe you're only a year into your process on the development of your device, or a year and a half, but now you've already gotten in with FDA, and you've already got some names who are willing to help you, right? So that's a major hit, right? You can talk to investors and say, we've been in front of FDA. You can talk to your business leaders and say, hey, we've already started on the path to consider what it's going to take to get on market. And for yourselves, you've already created a conduit to FDA as maybe if I have a quick question, they're willing to answer it instead of me having to go through a 75-day pre-submission. Or do you need a pre-submission to clarify issues, right? If you're going to go and clarify an issue, you don't really ask, what testing do I need? I say, hey, FDA, I've done these 20 tests and we think these are adequate. Does FDA agree? And here's why we've done them, right? And then you allow FDA to focus their feedback and say, oh, those 20 look good. If you had done one more, you would have what you need. And now as a company, you say, okay, great. FDA has given me confirmation that if I do one more verification test, I have the evidence to support the safe and effective use of this device, right? So that's a major win to take advantage of that pre-submission process and have some certainty. Now, as FDA will say, it's not 100% certainty, right? Things can change, but you're going from a 50-50 guess to a 99%. I think I know the answer, and that's a pretty big gain for a business. Other opportunities, I'm not going to touch on these, but think about all the touch points you need. Do you need to help with your classification? Do you have administrative questions? I've been in informational pre-submissions where then the FDA follows up and says, hey, that's great. We see that you're starting on this path to go for whatever it might be, breakthrough designation. Here's some names that can really help you work through this process. Now, they're not going to tell me what testing I need, but they're going to make it easier just to at least get to my next steps, right? So that's another gain. And then ongoing discussion during submissions. I like to get in touch with FDA once I know who my reviewer is, because if I make myself available, instead of getting everything in a deficiency, they might say, hey, I didn't see this document. Do you have it real quick? And I'll send it over. It saves FDA time and it saves my business time, right? So there's a lot of communication, I think, that people want to back off. And I'm not saying call FDA every day and say, is my submission done yet, right? But offer to help and offer to partner with FDA so you can explain what some of the intricacies of your device are so FDA doesn't have to guess. Then the last couple of minutes, FDA communication considerations. Be honest, obviously. I put this on there though because I think people sometimes feel the need to hide from FDA. And I always say you don't need to hide from FDA, but on the next bullet, know what you know and know what you don't. And when I say I don't know something, it gives me a second chance to follow up with FDA. I say, I don't know, but I'm going to get with my expert and I'll reach back out. And when I reach back out, FDA might have formulated another question. So then I can get 2 questions done with that extra reach out, which is really going to smooth my review process. Be on the same page with your team. Really know the story. And I say story, not in the fictional sense, but in the what does your device do and what are you looking for it to do on the market, right? Your device may be the greatest thing, but think about the indications you're going for now, because that's what you want to communicate to FDA. Take advantage of every opportunity and do not fear FDA. FDA is there to partner, right? They want safe and effective treatments on the market for patients. And so make sure you're partnering with them so they can help you do that. Finally, post-market considerations, the AI, the ML space, there's a lot of changes that are ongoing. So acknowledge this, understand and you can build this into some of your submissions too. FDA, hey, if the following components change, we're not going to submit notifications or new 510Ks because here, right? We know that this doesn't affect the device. It doesn't change the intended use. So know your strategy. If you're a 510K, if you're a PMA, know your strategy for change control. Avoid putting adulterated or misbranded devices on. And finally, FDA is familiar with artificial intelligence, though the field is constantly changing and some of the framework which when they work under is not going to be updated nearly in time. So know your device, know how to communicate your device and know what your device does. Have a bold communication strategy for the FDA and take advantage of it and execute to that plan, and always take advantages of opportunities to partner with FDA because you're going to get a lot of valuable information. Your business is going to have more continuity and more predictability, and everyone's going to be a lot happier, right? You're going to get issues no matter what. Fires are going to start no matter what you do, but make sure you put out the ones you can put out and you have FDA help those that you cannot. Thank you for your time. I don't know if there's any questions now. I know Cord and I will have a little bit of time after too, but you know, hopefully you think about this and really craft your FDA strategy because it's really important. And sometimes it's taken into account too late and you've already missed some opportunities along the way.
There's one online question.
Okay.
Hello. Okay. Yeah. So can you speak to how software architecture influences how FDA regulates or applies their enforcement discretion to non-medical versus medical device software functionalities?
Yeah. So I mean, that's going to be fact specific because of the components. But what the architecture does is it allows FDA to see you've considered the necessary blocks in place, right? So if you have a non-medical device component and you have a class 3 device, you're showing that that non-medical device component, it's not going to influence, it's not going to affect the delivery of the class 3 device. So that stimulation, if you're back to the DBS example, that stimulation is not impacted by what happens to this non-medical device. So that architecture is really the story that FDA is going to rely on to then look for matching evidence, right? So they want to see that, you know, your cybersecurity architecture, all right, you've got your verification evidence. So it's more to tell a story than to classify your device. Individual classifications would be done in different requests, but it's going to be a roadmap.
And I think it would be really important in the internal documentation rationale is if you do decide that it falls under enforcement discretion to have that story documented internally if you ever get questioned.
Yeah, absolutely. You should file regulatory assessments on those various components.